Well, this might be presumptuous, but thank you all for coming and joining the growing plant gardening movement that is called Naturescaping. It's my intention today to share with you what Naturescaping is, why it's important, and how you can naturescape your very own green space, no matter the size or the shape. To begin, we should define what naturescaping is. It's a method of landscape design that focuses on harmonizing the coexistence of humans and nature in a space. For example, your backyard. Landscape design principles are used to create both aesthetically pleasing and functional space. The functional space is for humans and wildlife. The use of native plants is emphasized to attract beneficial insects, birds, butterflies, other creatures by providing a multitude of vital habitat components while reducing the need for laborious hours maintaining, watering, and feeding the plants of the landscape. In addition, some of the secondary benefits of naturescaping include reduced water usage, enriched stabilized soils, increased river, stream, really any body of water health due to that lack of erosion or fertilizer and chemical runoff. And in my opinion, it should be said plainly, a savings of money in multiple ways. All that being said, even with the benefits mentioned, it can be challenging to work through some of the stigmas that have come to overshadow the use of native landscapes. Oh, it's such a wild look. Bees in my backyard. Or decomposing leaves atop a planting bed versus piles in the street. I have 5 tricks of the design trade that I want to share with you to help you assemble an aesthetically appealing naturescape space. Or if you already have plants planted and you're satisfied with the overall landscape, possibly tame some of the wildness of the yard. I have a skyline I'd like you to look at. Does anyone recognize that skyline? Sorry, you're all on mute. It's New York City. Not usually known for this skyline, but thank you to Land Styles for providing some excellent photos. So the New York skyline, Highline, sorry, it's an elevated New York rails to trails park featuring northeastern native plant species with city views, connecting rail yards of Midtown Manhattan to an industrial district along the Lower West Side of Manhattan. How about this space? It's in our very own great state. It's Olbrich Botanic Gardens, sporting our prairie drop seed. Olbrich is a 16-acre outdoor display garden you can stroll through, open daily. I'm pretty sure it's free to the public. I once heard someone describe naturescaping as a landscaping partnership between nature and humans. A naturescaped landscape eases that yard maintenance, eases it. There's no such thing as no maintenance. It recreates vital habitat that provides, again, clean water to our local watersheds and protects wildlife as well as the plants used from being threatened or endangered. To naturescape, understanding the basic habitat needs is necessary. Habitat is both the landscape and the biological conditions that affect a plant and or an animal within a geographic area. Food Space, whoops. There we go. Food, space, cover, and water are essential to have effective habitat. So I want to talk a bit about those. Space, let's start with space. All animals need space. You may need space, I need space. Think of it as the space that we define as territory. So territory to find food, courting, nesting. In your landscape, you want to make sure you're offering space that acts as a bit of a buffer from human activities for the wildlife you're trying to attract. We'll use birds as an example. Right now, very important time of year. The birds are getting ready, strutting their stuff. It's the breeding season or fast approaching, where there'll also be nesting. We need to think about allowing space for the wildlife to partake in those natural activities and not have constant human disturbance. And that's a pro tip. So every now and again, I'll offer up a little pro tip. So create areas within your yard that have minimal human traffic. That's going to encourage your wildlife use. My husband and I, on the north side of our house, it abuts the property and the garage of our neighbors. We have a bird feeder on the northeast corner, and man, those birds use that narrow strip between the north side of our house and the south side of the neighbor's garage as an airstrip. It just, they fly by, and it's amazing to see them using this space that we really have no need to go over onto the north side of our house. So a great example. Food. Native vegetation provides food for 10 to 15 times more wildlife than non-native plants. My boss, Kim, I think I saw her here. She defines, or at least simulates, non-native plants to plastic fruit. So in your yard, you may have a bowl of plastic fruit if none of the plants within it are native. Sure does look good, that pear, that silky pear, but are you going to eat it? No. It might look good, but it has no nutritional value. Then, speaking of native plants, let's talk about our oaks. The Quercus genus supports just over 500 species of Lepidopteran in North America. That's butterflies and moths. Versus eucalyptus, the Black Sally cultivar, that's it's actually native to Australia, supports one species of Lepidoptera here in North America. So brought over from Australia, planted here in North America. It has about 49 species it supports back home, but one here in North America. If you're trying to attract wildlife, especially birds, planting an oak is going to support more life than that eucalyptus. If we climb higher up on the food chain, we can consider the animals that then eat Lepidopteran species. So birds, 96% of all the terrestrial bird species in North America rely on insects and other arthropods to feed their young. Another fun fact, if anyone's read Doug Tallamy's latest Nature's Best Hope book, you may have noted a really amazing finding by Susan Smith with Rochester Institute of Technology in Minnesota. She's been testing a hypothesis that autumn ripe berries are nutritionally equivalent, whether they are produced by native shrubs or introduced non-native shrubs. Her findings in 2013 revealed that berries produced by introduced Eurasian plants, such as buckthorn, Japanese honeysuckle, and multiflora rose, typically contain less than 1% fat, while berries from native shrubs, such as arrowwood viburnum, gray dogwood, even poison ivy, are loaded with valuable fat, often nearly 50% by weight. Why does that matter? Well, both migrating and residential birds, depending on fall ripe berries for fat that they need to fuel the migration or to build up fat reserves for the winter months. Native plants also are adapted to local soils, climate conditions. They are kept in check by the biological components of life, that is competition, disease, predation. They play a role in the cycle of life that has been evolving for millions of years. So have an implicit relevance, be it food or we'll say emotive beauty, in our case, to our lives and the life of other animals. Water. Water will attract more wildlife to your yard than bird feeders or specialized food products. It's essential for life, for survival. Animals use it to drink, to bathe, to forage. Pro tip, if you do have a bird bath or water feature, a puddling station for butterflies, be sure to clean it out weekly. That too can harbor pests. So make sure you keep your bathtub clean for your furry and wild friends. Cover, otherwise often referred to as shelter. Cover provides a place to raise young, protection from predators, and shelter from the weather. Be creative, because Mother Nature is creative as well. Cover exists in many forms, from leaf cover or brush piles to bird and bat houses. Thanks, Dad. Pro tip, leave your downed woody plants and or your leaf debris to provide some of that cover for animals and insects. That's what they're going to live in, especially during the winter months. Hopefully everyone's. Be sure to write any questions if you need them. I want to now transition into the design principles of naturescaping. Okay, they're very similar to landscape design principles. Landscape design is the conscious arrangement of outdoor elements for human satisfaction and enjoyment. Good landscape design considers the following principles to enhance the composition and avoid poor plant choices as well as improper plant placement. So we have order, unity, rhythm and line, proportion, sometimes often referred to as scale, and then focalization of interest. Naturescaping marries or embeds ecology and conservation with these design principles to make that harmonious balance between human aesthetic, functionality, and natural habitat. Let's talk a bit about each of these principles. Order, defined as the big picture or overall framework of a design. A great example is a tree. Order is evident in the trunk structure and the branches. They make the skeleton of the tree. The trunk, the branches, they determine that overall form. And really it's the leaves upon it, within it, that merely reinforce the structure, that order. Unity, how the landscape elements tie together, how the elements really work with the existing structures, so your house, garage, driveway, neighbor's house, et cetera, et cetera. it's influenced by size and shape, color, texture of the different elements you're putting into the design. Thinking back on our tree, so unity in a tree can be seen by the similar size, shape, color, and texture of the leaves, right? They're all similar. They create the appearance of one tree. You may have many leaves or hundreds of leaves on a tree, but when you look at it, because of the leaves' similarities, it creates a canopy of one. Rhythm and line addresses the factors of time and movement, flow, and there's usually a progression of similar forms, colors, textures throughout the landscape that can help with that movement. Proportion and scale, really important, especially when we're talking about native plants, in my opinion. It's the relationship between all of the features. So plants should be in scale with the existing site elements as well as each other. You want your plants to be to scale with your house or to scale with each other. Mother Nature does this intrinsically, all on our own. We have gradations. We go from a prairie to a savanna to a woodland, a forest. That same proportionality is followed in nature. You always want to choose the mature size of the plant when you're considering which plant and the placement. It all needs to fit nicely together. And then lastly, focalization of interest. Really just, these are focal points within a landscape where attention is either naturally drawn to or the designer creates that directive look by placing a bird bath or a vegetable garden, something of that nature. Okay, are you ready? Here are the 5 tricks of the trade. In an urban and or residential space, we achieve these 5 principles of design by planting a mix of herbaceous and woody plants, plant in drifts and masses, space your plants wisely, keep them to scale or proportionate to each other. And the more we learn, mowing your edges has a big impact. We'll talk about these in a bit more detail. So planting a mix of herbaceous and woody plants. So incorporating woody and herbaceous plant species will give your planting year-round interest. Woody shrubs and trees act like the skeleton of a space. Their limbs and branches are going to create accent points, provide shade. They could create privacy or overall visually frame the landscape. That image on the right, both of them were taken up in Door County, I think a few years ago now, but if you look at the photograph on the left, your eye is most likely drawn to that smooth sumac that's in more of the foreground. But if you look beyond it, you'll actually find a hedgerow. The property abuts fruit orchard, so they've actually created a fence row, a living fence row just beyond that. So you should be able to get a sense of how the woody plants really can help frame your view and or block it, create privacy throughout the landscape. Herbaceous plants, let's see, here we go. Oh, here's some more beautiful images from the Chicago Botanic Gardens. Herbaceous plants offer more of that continuous color and the texture from spring to autumn, all right? It should be noted that spring ephemerals are a huge component of naturescaping and should be elements incorporated into your space. Virginia bluebells here. Ephemerals are some of the first ones to offer food and foraging prospects to the insects that are waking up in the springtime. Focus on leaf texture as much as flower color, dare I say even more. Why? Because flowers only last 1 week, 2 weeks. If we're lucky, some of our natives actually have about 4 weeks of flowering, whereas the leaves are persistent before and beyond or after the flowers. So think of texture like big leaves. So our big leaf aster has beautiful big leaves. Serrated leaves like our sweet fern, actually very fragrant as well. Fine, thin leaves like grasses, our prairie dropseed, and cones and fruit are also interesting elements that herbaceous and woody plants offer. When it comes to conifers, know that we have evergreen and deciduous conifers. The image on the left here, the conifer in more of the foreground with the aspens behind it is our native tamarack. It's just starting to have a leaf transition. It's our one and only deciduous conifer. Pro tip, plant a variety of species to provide many food sources. So berries, seeds, bugs are attracted to flowers. They too are a food source. Buds of your plants, leaves. I know the caterpillars are going to be eating the milkweed leaves. That's the way it's supposed to be. The plant is going to be okay. Flowers have nectar and pollen, protein-packed pollen. And flower nectar is really a sugary, sweet iced tea drink. The planting of a variety of flowers is going to allow for varying months of that color. Planting in drifts and masses. So planting in drifts creates this sense of rhythm and line. Thank you again for taking some great pictures, land style. We're back at the New York High Line. When you plant drifts, the slight gradation changes, be it color or texture, form, even topography, they provide visual stimulation and a sense of movement. Anytime plantings are massed into identifiable groups, there's a fundamental sense of order. Plant species you may have heard this, but in odds, so groups of 3, of 5, you can have 1 focal plant. When we get up to the 7, 8 plant range, our eye tends to naturally group. So 1, 3s, 5s, and then when you get up to 7 and 8, just clump. This creates repetition. The photograph on the right side, hopefully you're getting that sense of repetition. Masses of single plants have also been shown to feed more wildlife than a collective onesie, twosie here and there. So bees especially like to visit one species throughout the morning, the hours. And then once that plant has been exhausted of its food source, they move to the next species. So planting onesies and twosies doesn't necessarily provide that all-around nutritional value that you might think by having all these different kinds of plants within the space. So consider how you want to limit the number of different elements or plants in your landscape. Pro tip, be sure to repeat those same plant species groupings throughout your yard or space. No repetition results in kind of a visually chaotic composition. And remember, there's a feeding behavior between or with our wildlife. Total repetition results in monotony and that sort of monoculture feel, which is really boring. Plus, you're not going to be supporting a wide range of species. When there's interconnection and it's used successfully, your eye moves smoothly from one element to the next without interruption, as do the bees. Space your plants wisely. Some of you may not find this aesthetic really appealing, but Chris does. So for restoration projects in a natural setting, the recommended spacing between individual plants is 1 foot on center. So from the center of one plant to the center of another plant, it's a foot, 12 inches. In a home landscape, backyard, house foundation planting, it's important to space your plants based on their mature height and spread, allowing the plant to grow to its mature size. This is going to allow for natural fullness, the ultimate flower production, and overall health and vigor. The way you space your plants will also create a sense of design style or theme. So Chris loves the natural feel. He has plunked in plants at more of that 1 to 1 or 1 foot by 1 foot centering. If that's not your look that you like, that's okay. There are ways of going about it and having a landscape look just as beautiful and more of that traditional spacing that you might find with non-native plants. So this Ecoscapes did a beautiful job here. This is a friend's yard up in Minnesota. They used all native plants. There's a beautiful mountain ash and some Canada columbine. We've got prairie smoke and some pussy toes. They did a beautiful job selecting repetitive plant species, spacing them properly. This landscape is about, the image is from a 3-year-old perspective. So the plants have been in the ground for about 3 years. Okay. If you're feeling unsure of how many plants you should be putting into a space, Midwest Ground Covers actually has a really great plant calculator. Midwest Ground Covers, they offer evergreens, deciduous shrubs, perennials, native plants, wetland and woodland, as well as prairie. So they do their part to offer some fantastic native plant options. Let's go through a little example using their calculator. So let's say you have a garden space that is 20 feet long and about 40 feet wide. You know, based on the plants that you're interested in putting in, their mature size is about 2 feet wide or 24 inches. So we're going to plug in our numbers, 20, 40, 24, boop, hit calculator. And just below, you can see some patterns that they've recommended, as well as the plants needed based on the distance between the plant centers that you actually suggested or stated. As far as planting pattern, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Typically, a square planting pattern creates a bit more of a formal look. A triangular planting is a little bit more natural in the overall growth pattern. Triangular patterns often mean you need a few more plants, individual plants, versus the square planting pattern. So this is where your interest and preference comes into play. There is no right or wrong way, pattern planting wise. So proper planting, space planting, is not only going to help fulfill those top 3 design principles of the landscape, but here's where the dollar matters, and it'll help you keep costs down rather than over purchasing. Another good thing to bear in mind are the plants that grow in more of clump form versus spreading form. So spreading by roots, be they stolons or underground rhizomes. If you're not looking for that really natural look, if you want something a bit more contrived and contained, find species, use species that are clump forming. Some great examples are purple prairie clover, prairie dropseed. I find stiff goldenrod to be really well behaved. Lead plant, prairie blazing star, just to give you a few. Here is a design I did a few years ago now. It's really the fresh mulch space in the foreground is what was redesigned. Again, just giving you some visuals of using native plants and setting it up so it can have a tamed feel. So the plants are in a space that's been allocated for their mature size. Keeping your plants to scale. So proportion and scale in the landscape design refers to the size of the parts of the design in relation to each other and to the design elements as a whole. One large towering oak may complement a 3-story office building, but it might dwarf a single-story home. If you refer to that drawing on the left side, the large scale, normal scale, and small scale, a single bird feeder might accommodate a few bird species, especially the food you put in it, but not the breadth of species in your yard. Of course, we can be dramatic, and a colossal fountain would dominate a private garden, but would enhance a large city plaza. So bear that all in mind. The image on the right here, the shrubs have gotten to a point where they are mature and out of scale with the house. They're blocking the windows, which might be something you're okay with. But if we're talking about reducing some of that wild look or taming the landscape a bit, it's going to look just that to other eyes. My rule of thumb that I offer to everyone is maintain a 2/3, 1/3 rule. So if your house is 15 feet, you're going to select a native plant that grows to be 2/3 or 1/3 the height of your house, or 2/3 or 1/3 more higher than your house to keep proportion. Let's say we're going to plant a pagoda dogwood. It grows anywhere between 12 to 15 feet if it's happy, larger. You're going to take that 12 to 15 feet, multiply it by 2/3 or 1/3. That's going to be the scale size plants you will select to grow around the pagoda dogwood. They will be in proportional size to your pagoda dogwood. From a design perspective, plants, again, they have 3 major functions: aesthetic, structure, and utilitarian. Aesthetically, plants create a visually pleasant environment. Structurally, the plants organize the design space. They can physically block a view or access a space. They can, again, imply a barrier. And then utilitarian-wise, they can transform the environment for the comfort of the user or the wildlife. They modify light, temperature, humidity. They can also control noise, odor, as well as provide the food for wildlife and humans, truly. Pro tip, the smaller the size planting, the more specific the placement and the understanding of the species arrangement. Choose plants that do not get taller than the width of the planting bed. An example, you have a planting bed that is 5 feet wide. The tallest plant should not grow higher than 5 feet. Lastly, mowed edges. This is something that we do in our parks, Washington Park, Riverside Park. I think Menominee Valley has some of this going on, but defining edges gives a naturalized planting a very deliberate look, providing evidence of active management. We call them cues of care, right? Mowing strips around the perimeter of a planting creates this cue of care. The border acts as a buffer, keeping plants from obstructing sight lines or flopping onto a neighbor's lawn, the sidewalk, the street. It also acts to frame, adding to that tended look of the landscape. Here's another great image. Monarch Gardens actually, yeah, wow, they did a great job of naturescaping this person's yard here. You can see on both the right and the left side of the property, along the property lines, there are mowed edges along the native planting space. Using hardscape materials versus mowing is also a way to define or create edges. We just did some landscaping last fall. The picture on the left is some of the land and stone steppers that take us from our driveway down into our yard. Meandering crushed gravel paths or even mulched pathways really allow you to access a space, which is important. Ethan, I believe we sent out a handout to everyone that talked a bit more about naturescaping and some of the elements with, sorry, trying to multitask.
Correct. I sent that out in the email. There was a document in the email I sent out with a Zoom link. So if you all go to your emails, there should be a Word doc in there with additional information that Michaela is talking about. It looks like I can't put Word docs into the chat here, but let me know if you don't have it and I can email that to you shortly after.
Yes, it's a naturescaping document that I crafted a couple years ago, but still very relevant, very applicable information, talking about how you can attract some specific genres of wildlife, be it migrating birds, butterflies, moths, even soil organisms, and some of the beneficial insects, be they predaceous or just pollinators. So with that, I wanted to ask if anyone had questions.